Welcome to Celebration. This is Pastor Terry Walters of Celebration Community Church in Pana, Illinois. If you've just joined our YouTube channel and haven't watched our messages, you need to do that. God will bless you for that. But that's who I am as pastor of the Celebration Church. We are taping this for August 2021 because we are now celebrating 20 years as a church. We started the church from scratch in our home in Pana 20 years ago. And over the years we've grown and changed venues and done several things. God's really done some great work. But it occurred to me as we celebrate that half our church or more don't really know the early days of our history. So we've put together a slideshow and an interview to help everyone to understand, and we invite you to understand because God is so good and He's done such a great job. So I asked one of our young ladies from church who's been with us through the whole thing as well, Melissa Meadows, if she would do the honors of interviewing and let me tell the celebration story.
Well, I appreciate the young part. But yeah, CCC has been a huge part of my life for the last 20 years. I was 12 and now well, you do the math.
Yeah.
But you were here from the beginning, and I was too young to really know the whole process. So tell me how it all got started. What was in your head?
Okay. Well, I had, I pastored a church where you attended when you were even younger for a little bit, and we felt led to leave there and went to a church in southern Illinois. And we felt good about the move, but it was obvious pretty quickly that it just wasn't going to work out. And normally a pastor, finds another church before he resigns, but I didn't feel led to do that. So I just resigned and was thinking about and praying about. Cheryl and I, my wife and I, had talked about over and over the possibility of just starting a church from scratch. Just do it and try to do it God's way. And so that was on my heart and mind, but I just wasn't sure. And her folks live in Nokomis, which is about 12 miles from here. And so we decided, rather than stay in that town, we'd go ahead and come up on weekends and worship with them at their church. And on one of those first trips, she said, "So what are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about starting a church from scratch." And she said, "I'm all about that. Where are you going to do that?" And I said, "Well, I've been thinking about Pana." And she said, "Okay." And so we went on to church with them one weekend. And then a local church, one of our sister Southern Baptist churches, Grace, invited us to do a revival. They didn't have a pastor at the time. And after the revival meeting, they said, "Why don't you just stay and preach for a while?" And we were doing the music and preaching both. And during that time, I was praying about and trying to figure out, is this God's plan? Mm-hmm. And yeah, we decided that's what we ought to be doing, is starting a church in Pana.
So why Pana?
Well, we knew about it a little bit. She grew up close to it, so they were always rivals in school, and so she, drove to Pana and drove around. And then the church that I pastored, where your family was a part of, was about a 20-minute drive away, and so we shopped in Pana. My son worked in Pana for a while once, so we were familiar with the town. So there was familiarity. We knew some people around. We also have 3 highways that come into Pana. And US 51 is a major one that comes through. So I thought, well, if the church ever grew to be kind of a regional church, it's easily accessible from other towns. So that was a little bit of a factor. But I think the biggest thing was knowing Pana, and I knew that there was no Southern Baptist church at the time in town.
Right.
Had a couple of country churches. And there also wasn't one that was doing contemporary music and contemporary style. And we just felt that that was the way to go for our time frame here, our era, so to speak. And we wanted to do contemporary music. I was kind of done wearing the suits and ties. We wanted to be a little more laid back because we're thinking we would reach unchurched people and people who aren't into the church traditional. And so Pana didn't have that. A strong biblical perspective as well as then the contemporary feel. Mm-hmm. So we thought, why not? We know some people around, including your family and some others who expressed some interest. And so we just felt like that was all God's leading to do it in Pana.
So how do you come up with the name Celebration Community Church?
That was interesting. Obviously, we weren't content where we were at.
Right.
We have no doubt the Lord sent us there, and we needed to be there for just that little bit. but we weren't all that happy, and obviously the church wasn't all that happy. They were having some struggles. We had just recently left a church that was having some struggles. My family, my wife's family, your family, other families, just it seemed like, I know this is an overblown thing, but it seemed like no matter who I talked to for the past few months before that, nobody was happy about going to church. And I thought, that's not right. And the psalmist said, and it's on our wall out front, that I was glad when they said to me. Another translation says, I rejoiced when they said to me, let's go to the house of the Lord. And I thought, we ought to be celebrating. And I thought, there it is. The church ought to be celebration.
Okay.
And so there it was.
So once you decided that, okay, you're going to do a church, you're going to do it in Pana, then you had to move to Pana.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about your house search. Tell us how that
the
all
house
came
story
out.
is crazy. Just to show how God's in all this. While we were preaching and singing over at Grace Church, we put the word out, as did they, and people, from former churches or people that we knew from Nokomis or whatever, they were coming by to do church with us and worship, especially during that revival week. We had a week's worth every night. And so they're asking, what are you going to do? And we're putting the word out that, okay, we're going to start a new church in Pana. And we got to find a house. So we began on those trips up on weekends to get the newspaper and start checking out rentals in Pana. And we didn't like anything we saw. There were plenty of nice homes for sale, but we had no money saved and no promise of any income. We weren't getting a sponsored church or association or anything, just going to start the church and I'll paint houses or whatever. So we're not prospective buyers. It's got to be rent. And we just couldn't find anything we liked. So I told Cheryl one day, I said, I'm going to go over and talk to a couple of realtors. Sometimes they know about houses that aren't really out in the public eye too much. They're trying to be a little more particular about who rents them. And so they would know. So I went to one of the local realtors and told them who I was. What I didn't know was one of the fellows that came over to Grace during the week, we were doing revival, was Brad Reynolds. And he was with us back in a former church on the praise team. Mm-hmm. And so they came to church. He said they hadn't been going to church like they should. They hadn't found anything they wanted. And I was telling him about what we were going to do, and he said, I need to get my family in that. He went back to his mother, who lived in Pana, and as a side business, had rental homes. And he said, Terry and Cheryl are coming to Pana to start a new church, and they're going to need a house, and a house that they can start church in. I didn't know any of this. She went out and bought the house that we started the church in, but I didn't know that. So I'm talking to a realtor about, we need a house to rent that's nice enough to invite strangers even into our home. And she said, I bet Shirley's got something for you. And she hollered at the secretary and said, wouldn't Shirley Reynolds have something for this man to rent for his church? And then she looked at me and said, she just bought a house right down the street on the highway for some preacher to rent. We're going to start church in it. And I thought, well, that's weird. I said, I got competition and I haven't even started. And I said, I think I know Shirley Reynolds. Is that what you said? She goes, yeah. And I said, her son Brad? He goes, yeah. I said, well, he's going to be a part of the church when we get it started and play music for us. And so she hooked me up, and I drove back to Nokomis. And on the way, Shirley called me and said, here you're in town looking for the house. I got you a house. And so I got a hold of Cheryl and said, I'm going to pick you up, and we're going back to Pana and hook up with Shirley. Too late for a long story short, but nonetheless, we got into the house and we were impressed. And she said, well, you can rent the one I'm cleaning right now, or you can rent that one. And I said, well, what about the money? She said, same price, either one. I said, that's a no-brainer. She said, that's what I told you. I got this house for you to do. She hadn't even closed on the house yet, but by the next week she owned it. By the next week we spruced it up a little, and we moved in on the last weekend of July and had a worship service the very next Sunday in church with 30 people, in our house. So, God moved ahead of us and provided. We're still in the house, and we had church in there for quite a bit, and it worked.
I remember church there.
Yeah.
But we outgrew it pretty quick, so then we moved on to the next chapter. Tell us about where we moved next.
We went to Dance Land. It was a former skating rink on the east side of town. We were outgrowing Sunday mornings. Wednesday nights was getting pretty big. Sunday nights was smaller. And it didn't take too long because we were like 30 the first Sunday, at 39 the second Sunday, and I'm thinking, we got to have another place. So I just started driving around Pana, looking at buildings, just by driving by, and I found this one. I thought, that looks promising. What is that place? It said Dance Land on it, and there's a mobile home behind it. So I thought, that's got to be connected. I just went up, knocked on the door, and introduced myself, and the lady was part owner, and told her what I was looking for, and she said, well, we got Sunday mornings open, let me just show you the building. We went in there and looked it over, and it had tables, it had chairs, it had a nice entry with 2 bathrooms. The only problem is it was a little dark because they had dances in there, and the walls were shag carpet from the skating rink days. Other than that, it was like fine, and it had a kitchen we could use. And the rent was reasonable, and she said, I got to talk to the other owner, but I don't see any problem for just Sundays. They were doing dances on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. That's like what Baptists do. You know, not the dances, the Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. And so within a week we sealed the deal on that. And so, you know, here's a picture of somebody, you know, coming out of Dance Land, a bunch of Baptists in Dance Land. In the old days, for a guy like me, that was like, Baptists don't dance. What are we doing? But God provided again before we even realized.
Nice. Now, even in those early days, we did a lot of events, I remember.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of those events and activities.
Well,
that we did.
we did revivals that other churches were holding because we didn't have the building, didn't have access to it during the week. So we would go like to Vandalia or maybe to Springfield and hook up with another church. So we did there was a power team that went around, the big muscle bodybuilders who were Christians, would do a revival, and the youth went over to Knights Action Park once or twice. The YE, which is Youth Encounter, a big youth conference in Peoria back in those days, an overnighter thing after Christmas.
Right.
And so somebody would take the youth. We took turns doing that. In fact, you were saved at one of those.
I was.
Yeah. So different things like that. We used the park and did pool parties and softball games and just, you know, picnics, whatever we could do to add to the fact that mostly at our church was worship on Sunday morning, worship on Sunday night, and then a Wednesday night Bible study. So we weren't doing Sunday school yet or some of the other things. So we enjoyed the fellowships and built our family unit.
Right. Well, we began to need more than just Sunday and Wednesday. So we moved over to Grandpa's Hardware. Tell us how that happened.
Well, that put us at almost a year. We weren't at Dance Land quite a year, but you're right. We were starting to outgrow Wednesday nights. We were having 25 teenagers sometimes, which was kind of funny too because we had the adults upstairs and the youth downstairs, and it was just getting crowded. And I said, you know, we need to pray about this. I didn't want a third location. We're at Dance Land on Sundays. We're at our house on Wednesdays. And if we had to move to another night, I said, we need to pray about this because they have dances on Wednesday night over there. And so not like a week later, she called me, the owner, and she said, hey, our dances are not working out on Wednesday nights. Would you guys be interested in having the building on Wednesday nights? So we did that for a while. But it just wasn't, you couldn't do anything Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever. Couldn't do anything big. You couldn't have individual classrooms. They were adequate for a worship service. But so one of our members, one of our trustees, knew that Grandpa's Hardware, south of town, he had sold his building and was renting for a while from the owner. But he lived next door and across the pond from him on his own property. He'd built a new store. So he moved out of his old one that he was now renting, and that became available. And our trustee knew that, so he set up a meeting, and we went out there and looked at it. And it was raw, but it was a little more spacious. And we would have it all month long, every month. And so we quickly made arrangements for that and had to remodel it and moved it out there.
And we were there for 14 years.
14 years, yes. And it was bare plywood walls, bare concrete floor. The office we converted to a kitchen, so it had no bathrooms. So we had to put in 2 bathrooms and a nursery built a little stage. We had to add everything. We had no tables and chairs because we got those at Danceland. So we had to buy our own. The youth helped paint the walls. We had to do all the work ourselves, which our people gladly did. And then we were able to move in there. I think it was Labor Day weekend, the first Sunday of September. So that's 13 months. We're now in our third place, but it's because of growth.
Right.
So that's what you want.
So how is it having our own building? How much of a game changer was that for being able to do our own stuff?
It was big because we didn't have the classrooms at first, but we could add them. There was room to do that.
Right.
So it allowed us to go in and out freely anytime. Didn't have to be a Sunday or Wednesday. We were able to build some classrooms later. It gave us a home base. Put up a permanent sign. Before we were just putting the sign in the yard every Sunday morning, taking it back home. Put up a permanent sign, had plenty of parking. Actually had a backyard. We put a volleyball set out there. We could use that, and so during Bible school we could play out there or whatever. So it really just provided us a lot more space to do the things we knew we always needed to do and just couldn't before. So that was a real game changer, to just have the space and for advertisement purposes to move everything there.
Well, we've done a ton of things over the years. Can tell us about some of the ministries that we've been involved in?
Well, we had our own stuff, which included lots of fellowship, just like we did before, but we also got into doing some plays just for fellowship and some murder mystery type plays just for fun and to build fellowship. But we also got busy and did some ministry stuff. So besides feeding ourselves with Agape Music Fest or the revivals we spoke of before, we continued those kind of things in our own fellowships. We got involved in Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, and several people got trained, and we went some different places after a tornado, after flooding, and some of our people then would go, and you stay all week, volunteer, and serve people who in distress. So we did some of that. It also allowed us to do, and these couple things were pretty major. One was Bible school. To have the property. We had done a Christmas Bible school at Danceland, but see, we could only do it on one weekend at a time, so we just did a couple of them. But in our own building with some yard and room to do things, we started doing Bible school and started doing that in a pretty big way. And our church really still does a great job with Bible school. And for a young, small church, we're gathering 30 to 40 kids along the way because we had decked it out and really built things. So over the years, we turned that into Noah's Ark and Mount Everest and, cave, polar explorations, just whatever. And really just went all out to make it memorable for the kids. And you can't do that in a once-in-a-while building or in a house where we started. So that helped us minister to kids. It helped us reach some other families, or at least let them know who we are and why we're there, that sort of thing.
Well, and VBS led to a really unique children's ministry. Tell us about that.
Well, I called it Straight Street. It was sort of I've described it to people as a Christian Sesame Street / Bible school. Because I was thinking, Sesame Street's been successful for years and years with puppets and street characters. So I thought, that's cool. And Bible school is one of the greatest things churches do all year long. And I thought, they're both winners. You put them two together, it's got to be a winning thing. And we called it Straight Street. We built a street set. But Straight Street is where, if you remember from the book of Acts, when Saul was converted and was blinded, he went to a house on Straight Street. Ananias went to Straight Street to restore his vision and get him baptized. And of course in Proverbs it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not in your own understanding, and he will make your path straight. And we've all heard of walking the straight and narrow. Right. So it just made sense that this children's program that's teaching them to trust and follow Jesus would be Straight Street.
That's awesome. Well, and then we went overseas.
Yeah.
You got me to take my first ever mission trip, and we went to Peru, not just once, but twice. At least for me, you went more than that.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, we decided after a few years, it was always the plan, but it just took us a while to get it done, that we would join the Rehoboth Baptist Association, which is from Effingham to Greenville to up here to Payne and all in between. An association of, 30 or 40 churches at the time, maybe 30, that work together to do things. Among Southern Baptist work, we're all autonomous churches, but we cooperate so we can get more done. And we decided we would officially join the association. And in so doing, that for us meant you get involved in whatever the association's saying we're going to do. We voted to do it, so let's do it. And one of the things about that time was they decided that we should get involved in some international missions rather than just sending money for somebody else to go. And it was suggested to do Peru, so they formed a little team, and my wife Cheryl was put on the team to go to Peru. Our church supported that financially. And they would go as a vision trip. And so the missionary down there took them up into the mountains and showed them around. And they began to get a vision of working with the Quechua-speaking people up in the mountains, way away from Lima, but you go to a city called Huánuco, and then from there you go farther up. And so she went on that, and so then the next year we needed a follow-up trip. And so she and I were going to go with someone else. They couldn't go at the last minute, so we went on our own. And I kind of got the bug a little bit more. I've always loved missions, but I hadn't gone. And so we came back and encouraged and talked about it. And before too long, you wanted to go. And I'm not sure, how did you get the bug?
I've always felt like I missed out on missions as a teenager, and those local mission trips that teenagers take. And I just felt like God was really putting it on my heart to be involved in something bigger than just our own community, to go to the ends of the earth. Yeah.
So you and I planned to go with some others on a team, and that fell through that year, probably because I was about to have a heart attack or something and literally had to have a triple bypass. But the next year we did go with another pastor and his daughter. And on that trip, you and I talked about it all the way home, that it needs to be a partnership. We met a pastor in Huánuco, the city, and we came back and pitched that idea to the association that it ought to be a partnership to train them to go into the mountains, which they can go all year. We just train them occasionally. And that it ought to be one team leader that coordinates that. And you looked at me and said, and that should be you. And I said, but we're not going to say that. And so we went to the meeting, and at the meeting, our director of mission says, and you should be the team leader. Will you be doing that? Would you be willing? And I said, yeah, I think so. And he said, you need to talk to the church. And I said, no, we already committed to be a part of the association stuff, and this is the stuff we're going to do. So we made plans. I went back, and we sealed the deal with them. And then you and I and my wife and my daughter and another couple, we went the next year. You helped me train some people because that's part of the deal of the team partnership. And so we could take another trip, and then it kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. But I think we did some really good stuff, and the connection's still there through the internet. So who knows what God's going to do with that. But our church, through special giving and just casting the vision, they supported all those trips. Association took care of my part as team leader. The rest of you, our church did that. So it wasn't just mine and your trip or my family's trip. It was our church's trips. Right. And it's a great way to get the gospel and follow the Great Commission on all the world. So,
So, but about that same time, we finally found some property for our own after that much time had passed. So tell us about that. Tell us how God has used this great facility that we have now.
Well, we looked off and on because we knew renting wasn't the way to go forever. But it was a decent place for us. It was beginning to show its wear and tear, but it was still room, so we were using it. Great parking and location in a sense, but we were always looking. And we saw several pieces of property, a couple of buildings along the way, and just never felt at peace. Me or one of the trustees or somebody or all of us would just be like, I don't know about that. That just doesn't seem right. And some of it was 8 or 9 acres in town, believe it or not, that we could have bought reasonably, but no building. And that would mean a lot of money. We still weren't all that big, 50 people maybe, I don't know. And so we're just praying about it, and we're checking it out and doing that sort of thing. Well, the year that I obviously was having struggles with my heart without realizing it, I learned that there was a church in town that was dwindling, and they were going to merge with one another town away. And so their building would be up for sale. I actually knew about it the Sunday that he was going to tell the crowd that they were going to vacate and put the building up for sale. So Sunday afternoon, I knocked on his door, and he put me in touch with their convention that owned the building. So over the next few months, we began to negotiate and talk about it a little bit. And then in January, I did have the triple bypass, and we're still negotiating and talking with our church about it. And by this time, we had grown several new families. We had put some money away for over 14 years. We put a little bit away. We weren't rich by any means, but we had enough money to buy this property and begin the process of remodeling, because it needed remodeling. And so they shot us a price and came down immediately $5,000. And I said, well, we'll have to talk it over, and we'll need to get in and see the building and let the people decide and vote. And I said, and I've got some trips coming up. I was getting fully recovered from the surgery and had 2 or 3 trips planned, including our June mission trip. And I said, I'm going to Peru in June. He said, well, we really need to know by then, or we've got to put it up for sale through a realtor. He said, if you could tell us before you go to Peru that when you come back, the church was deciding. So if you could have your vote, you don't have to buy it yet. We'll drop another $5,000 off. So I thought, we're saving $10,000 just by doing it now. And so talked to the trustees about that, and I said, I think that's doable. We had already talked that we would do it, but it did require a vote.
Right.
We were all pretty sure that it was, to me it was like a no-brainer. For the price they offered, we had that much money and more to get started. So in this 14 years you're talking about out there at that building, we were able to save that money, and yet we never refused any ministry we thought we should do. So it wasn't like we were hoarding the money.
Right.
That's just what we had extra. We had gained several families who had a heart to work and who knew how to do stuff. We didn't have that before. God was putting together the people, the finances, and it was, of course, His timing. So when this all came available at a price that we couldn't really pass up, with the people who had the talents and abilities to do the remodeling, most of the work ourselves, it was like, oh, that's why we couldn't find anything for 14 years.
Yeah.
Had we jumped on something else, I have no doubt we'd have messed things up.
For sure.
But God wouldn't let His Spirit be settled with that. So we bought the property in July. After our mission trips in June, we bought the property in July. We started work in August. And we had our first service in November of that fall. Not done with it. We're still not done with it. Because there's always more we can do, because God just keeps providing the vision, the finances, and the people to continually tweak it and do more. And so we've got the new property in town, which amazingly to me seemed to tell the community, after 15 years, that we were a real part of the community. We now had permanency because it was our building, and I think the whole town kind of watched our progress as we built this and remodeled it and all that. And so it was a great testimony to God, and I think it's still a great tool. So it's a dream come true for me.
Well, now we're here 5 years later in this building, but 20 years as a church.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, it's amazing to me, and I don't know why I'm amazed when God does amazing things, because He's an amazing God. But, you pray for things, and we started the church with every hope that it was going to work because God was in it. That's why I didn't hook up with anybody for funding, and I was willing to paint houses and do whatever work I could do to make a living. And I don't know how big a vision or small a vision I may or may not have had, but it was about just God getting this church, this celebration church. This church, it's not a feel-good church. We just feel good about church. And so I preached the word. I've often said you should feel good about going to church, even if you get convicted of sin, because that's a good thing.
Right.
And so you should feel good about going and taking care of business as you worship God. And so that church needed to happen. Size, I'm not worried about. How many ministries we can do, because I've learned God does that. I could go on and on about how He's provided, even from outside of our church, even in finances. Just quickly to suggest that, we got $10,000 from a source from a guy I met on Friday, and he gave me $10,000 on Monday for the church. We got property donated for us to expand our parking and our yard and maybe even the building now. We're talking about that already. Our mission trip was provided, some of it by money who, at the time, she wasn't coming to our church. The house story, how God provided that. He just has proven Himself over and over and over. And so to me, it is literally a dream come true. It's not just a fantasy dream, but the dream that God put in my heart to start a church that would, be a church. There's the blessing of not having a bunch of traditions to get stuck on.
Right.
We have to be careful now. We're 20 years old. We're growing up. But we didn't have all that baggage. We didn't have all that. We only have, this amazes my preacher friends, but we only have one business meeting a year. It takes about 10 minutes. We did this entire building program with no other business meetings but the one that said, yeah, let's buy it and fix it. That was it. No plans, no estimates, no nothing. Just because we're going to do whatever it takes and let God do the part we can't. And He's proven Himself over and over. So that dream has been there. It's been a great ride for me personally for 20 years. I think that my philosophy, I told somebody the other day, was this: I'm just trying to hang on and stay out of God's way. People might think I'm pastoring, but I'm just hanging on and staying out of His way and watching Him work, and it's been an amazing thing. And I chose you to do this interview because you've been through it all, and I think that you represent what the celebration story is, and that's reaching and developing people. And so that's why, from attending and baptizing and discipling and working with, and then having you be involved in them and taking over leadership roles, that's what it's about. And so I thought, who better to interview me than one who is what we put into practice here. And so I think the future for Celebration is very bright, because you're not the only one. We've got several others that they're products, in a sense, of our ministries, and that's as it should be.
So, any ideas of what the future holds?
Well, no. I think COVID kind of taught us that last year. For those watching, last year was the year of shutdowns, and I think it taught us that things can happen quickly and overnight. So to kind of predict the future, but I feel like that unless the Lord comes back pretty quickly, that we're going to need to expand our facilities one way or another. We got a couple of possibilities, but we're doing that if we do it because that's going to expand our ministries. And we can have separate places for like an online studio, separate places for Straight Street instead of just our fellowship hall. That's going to take more people. So it's not a prediction, it's a desire that some of our people get a little more involved, and that'll help us in turn reach more people. And those people will be the ones who lead those ministries. As for me, I don't have a clue. 66 with a million problems, and none of those are anything God can't handle. So I'm just going to hang on and stay out of His way for a few more and see what happens. I think the future's bright, and it's bright because we just want to be God's church. That doesn't mean we're perfect and we're doing it right all the time, but it means we're doing what we can do to follow His leadership, and we're going to keep celebrating God's power and presence. That's kind of vague, but that's what we're doing.
Well, thank you for an amazing 20 years, and here's to many, many more.
Yeah. God bless you.